So this is a continuation of the Value in Energy Data seminar series, where we try and link together sort of some of the value you can get from making data open, or what sort of value, what sort of data sources out there could really bring some new technologies or applications, or help support the energy system. I'm really happy to have Professor Hermann De Meer here today to give a talk. Professor De Meer is a full professor at the University of Passau in Germany, and also an honorary professor at UCL in the UK since 2003. We first met at a summer school which Hermann had organized in Passau on digital and energy analytics, which was very enjoyable. And so I'm very excited to hear the talk today. We'll be talking about a lot of his research work, which is looking in sort of energy efficiencies and smart cities, also looking at areas like black start and storage systems. So without further, one more thing before we go into that, we'll probably leave the questions till the end, and as usual, sort of write in the chat or put your hand up and you can ask live. So yeah, without further ado, I'm very happy for Hermann De Meer to join us today, and so take it away.
All right, so it's a great pleasure and of course honor to be in this series and to have a chance to speak here. And I think the topic is very interesting, and actually I don't have much answer to what the title of the series promises, but I think I'd rather like to give some insights into our projects that we are running. And hopefully also in the discussion, we can relate it to the topic of this seminar. So we tried our best in order to, let's say, fit the project into perspectives with regard to the series topic, which is the value of energy data. And I think we already learned a lot for this. I think it's a quite interesting and absolutely valid topic. All right, so talk about our research and relation to value of energy data, and covering some of our projects, in particular the so-called EMSIC projects, which is about the usage of batteries and the context of using the batteries, in particular with regard to flexibilities in power systems. Also, in EMSIC, we are required to try to provide data publicly available, and of course there's a big challenge with that, and it's non-trivial to do that. So that's part of this EMSIC project. Then we have a project which is quite fundamental, and I think Steve, you already mentioned it, on black start, where we're looking into the interdependency of the power system, the ICT system, and if any of those is affected in a detrimental manner, this might have an impact, and the effects might spill over, right? So in particular, there are issues like timeliness effects. And of course, if you have a blackout or a semi-blackout and you want to reboot your whole system, the performance matters, and timeliness matters, and the degraded performance matters. And that's the goal of this project, in order to optimize, let's say, the rebooting of the system under adverse effects, right? And of course, there also the validity of the data matters a lot. There are issues how accurate your estimation is in order to use the best possible way, making use of the data, right, that's available. And this is in such adversarial conditions, this is really hard. But there's also, let's say, the situation where we're not having a blackout yet, but where systems are operated under detrimental conditions, and you want to make the best out of it in order to avoid a blackout. So let's say in a kind of brownout situations. So there also the performance matters a lot. And what you want to do is, although there's a degradation, you want to keep the services still up and running as much as you can. So these are two elementary projects in this regard. Then we having some research going on with regard to EV charging, electric vehicles. This is a European project in the Horizon 2020, which has actually finished very recently. There, of course, we try to take advantage of renewable energy for EV charging on the one hand side. On the other hand side, We wanted to avoid any detrimental effect, or as much as we could, for the state of the grid, the power grid, because I mean there's grand plans, how many EVs will be charged in the future on the grid, and of course there are fast chargers and all sorts of things. There's the wall boxes, there are public charging stations. There's lots of anxieties how this is going to happen and work out. So our approach is to look predominantly into smart charging. So being responsive to the situation in the grid and being able in a distributed manner, a bit like, we know it from TCP in the internet, in order to be responsive to the situation in the grid. There's a big challenge if you want to maximize the renewables in the grid for charging, because you do not exactly know, let's say, what is the power mix, how much renewables there are. These are also some issues that are strongly related to the data and to validity of data. Also the resolution of data, let's say, with regard to time and space, and how this could be combined in order to take advantage of that. Because if you take it seriously to maximize the intake of renewables for electromobility, this is quite crucial. Then there are some new European projects, the EasyRes project, which is about ancillary services for the power grid in a distributed manner, meaning based on renewable energies and distributed energy sources to provide ancillary services in a similar fashion as we used to have them with synchronous generators, power plants that are based on fossil fuels or nuclear power, but they're dismantled in our country, in particular at the moment, increasingly so. And as a result, we have to live with a distributed, decentralized system, and we want to have it operable in a very resilient and reliable manner, in a dependable manner, which is a big challenge. So this is part of the EasyRes project, where again, the significance of data is important. We need to have a distributed information system that is allowed to retrieve information, give meaning to data, and so forth, right? And a new project called Reenergetic, which is another European project, which looks into energy communities. So there's not much results I can talk about this, but this is just on the onset. The project is about, well, it has started, but it's in the very early state. I'll say a few words on this as well, if you allow me. All right, so the first project, which is called EMSIC, which is the one I mentioned first, and this is actually a Bavarian project. It's a collaboration between the university and a company. And this company specializes on the usage and the selling of battery and energy managed systems, in particular for the batteries, and many purposes, right? Now, the question is, if you have renewable energy sources, how you can use the batteries in the best possible way, right? For example, what you could do, you could charge your battery whenever there's energy and power supplied. You charge your battery until it's full, and then you deplete it again whenever need arises. This actually could lead to some issues that might be unexpected. For example, that first of all, you might actually increase the problem to the grid due to the charging of the battery in a quite uncontrolled fashion, because you might introduce some synchronization between the different installations, because let's say if the batteries are charged, they're all in the same area, and of course they're all at the same climate and the same sun, and of course the same radiation, and as a result they're kind of synchronized. In a way, they might also be in a situation where simultaneously the batteries are full, and if the batteries are simultaneously full, then at the same time, there's a sudden rise, a spike of power that is provided to the grid, for example, as a side effect. So we actually, with the battery system, we're introducing new challenges to the grid. And then as a result, we might need to curtail, for example, PV feed into the grid, which of course is wasteful. That's what we don't want, right? So there's a kind of actually unexpected, perhaps unpredictability that's introduced this way, and also there's issues of losses due to curtailments. And for that reason, we try to investigate the possibilities to optimize the usage of batteries such that we can avoid peaks and other detrimental effects like curtailments. For that, of course, data analysis needed, right? We need to forecast based on data analysis. So big data analysis methods, AI methods, and so forth are to be applied. And for that, of course, this has to become an integral part of an energy management system. Right, so for example, you could do this based on time series analysis, where you're looking into historical data, weather data, generation and load profiles, and then, of course, with using some neural networks approach, you could try to mimic, of course, the occurrences in the past by time series analysis and make predictions. And actually, it works pretty well, as you could see on the slide. Oh, I need the pointer. I think that's better. Laser pointer. So you can see on the slide here, if this neural network approach has been used, then you could predict quite well ahead of time, and you need this prediction in order to control the charging and of the batteries properly, right? So you need to have this information in place. Right, so we had this particular neural network here, and it turned out to be doing a reasonable job, right? On the other hand, there are other possibilities how the data, so since the seminars in data analysis, there's other possibilities to come up with predictions and do an analysis of the data, meaning that we investigated the real physical properties, right, of the PV installations by using climate data and historical data and parameters of the installations. So for example, what's the orientations of the panels, right? What's their tilt? Then, of course, observations of peak power supply, the locations in terms of latitude and longitude, and so forth, and try to find out what is the sensitivity, let's say, of all these parameters, because somehow there are many of those parameters. Some are more significant, others are less significant. So we investigated the impact, the sensitivity of all these parameters on the possibilities of the system forecast. And you can see, for example, in this figure here, that the parameters have substantially different impact, right? So, the peak power, for example, has a significant impact. Then, of course, the panel orientation has also some significant impact, but other parameters are less important. This is very important to take into account in order to select the most meaningful parameters for the system. And of course, together with then the climate data, one is pretty much able to do an analysis, and in order, for example, to precisely locate the system, where you can see this valley-shaped figure, where the lowest point of this figure gives you a precise location and orientation, and then you can go on, right? So this is kind of data analysis with a lot of challenges. And so you can see that the time series analysis and physical systems modeling both have advantages and disadvantages. And the interesting thing actually is to bring them together in the end and to make the most out of it. So based on that, we were able then to come up with pretty sophisticated forecasting models based on mixed integer linear programs and to optimize multi-objectives, right? For example, you can see this figure on the right-hand side where, let's say, you could see this as, let's say, a smart home where different installations are in place. There's a connection to the grid. There's an EV. There's several EVs, 2 EVs, but are being connected here. And then, based on the energy system, the energy storage system, a battery system, altogether, there's a potential of flexibility, right? And then, of course, there might be demand for flexibility. You can see that there is a demand for flexibility to be provided in terms of kilowatt power. And this flexibility has been asked for, let's say, at 10 o'clock. And this is exactly a certain peak demand of power that's been asked for a certain duration. And this can be provided. And according to this flexibility demand, that all the resources are scheduled ahead of time, planned ahead of time, which you can see from this figure. So you can see the PV feed in and what's been provided, and well, how the EVs are being charged and so forth. So you can see this from all this figure, and there's something also very interesting. You can see this gray shaded area, which is some additional flexibility that could also be used in order, let's say, to offer further flexibility to the market, because flexibility is valuable a lot. And of course, you can offer flexibility to the market and respond according to the degree of freedom that you have. And all the other components are adjusted based on optimization that are being calculated based on the predictions that we did with our forecast methods, right? So, of course, this is, let's say, one household where you have 2 EVs and a battery installed and an energy management system in place. But of course, to a larger scale, we not only requested to manage individual components or end consumers, but of course, to a large scale, right? We're always talking about a large scale system where we have aggregation, disaggregation effects. So demand for flexibility means the demand needs to be disaggregated, but potential needs to be aggregated. The question is how to do this. This is another interesting data-related question. How to optimize the available resources. You could do it with regard for cost, which is the most common thing, saying, okay, if certain flexibilities are demanded, what would be the least expensive form, how to do that, right? And so you could see that in these figures, this has been done, where you could, let's say, see the cost of providing a certain flexibility is been given in this figure. And for example, the darker the color is, the costlier things become. So the light area is the preferable area where cost is relatively low, right? But cost, meaning low cost, doesn't mean it's always feasible or a very good approach or a very likely approach. You could also try to, let's say, investigate the situation with regard to the probability of meeting all requirements, right? If you do that, maybe costs might be higher, but to meeting all goals might be more likely. Taking this into account, we did some optimization based on the probability to reach the goals. You can compare these 2 points here that are corresponding in order to provide flexibility of a certain amount, of a certain kilowatt, for a certain time period. And then you could see that in this case, the probability of achieving that goal, although being quite inexpensive, relatively inexpensive because it's a light color here, is also quite unlikely in the end, meaning that you have the darker the color, the more likely it is in this case to fulfill the requirements. So on the other hand, what could also do the opposite thing in order to try to maximize the probability of meeting a certain goal and accepting higher costs. So these 2 figures resemble that goal. We can see that the color is getting darker, meaning that the probability of meeting the goal is increased. At the same time, the cost is also increased because the color is darker here. So that's the meaning of this, right? So it's interesting to look at these 2 things. So the most common insights from research and literature is actually this case, but we thought it might also be worthwhile to investigate the probability of succeeding. Perhaps actually have a compromise, let's say a weighted combination of both criteria. Now, of course, it's clear that the quality of the data matters a lot, right, for that. So one should investigate quite a bit of energy into providing good forecast models for that in order to be effective. Otherwise, of course, if there's a large failure range, then the success is quite limited. So this is part of this MSIC project, how to optimize the usage of energy storage, of battery energy storage, right, in order to, for various purposes, for example, providing flexibility. But of course, you want to meet this goal in order to provide the flexibility and to maximize the likelihood of it, or to minimize the cost for something like that, right? Now, another goal of MSIC is to publish as much data as possible, which is again a big challenge to have open data to be fulfilled. Why is this a challenge? Well, of course, I mean, for research, you need to get insights into data, and you need certain type of data for the data to be useful for your research, right? But on the other hand, there's the wish of providing anonymity, or this is quite important, or guaranteeing privacy. So this is a kind of a clash if you look at the system about, you know, the open EMS perspective and an open energy management system, that is where, of course, there are contributors, homeowners, what have you, resource owners. They want to protect their privacy. On the other hand, there's research which actually needs to get access to critical data at some occasions, and this is kind of unavoidable. You want to get some insights. You need to get hold of data that might be critical. As long as you don't publish the information, the data, things might still be okay, right? Because you don't need necessarily to give everything away by doing research. On the other hand, if you want to publish on an open data platform, things can get quite nasty and critical and difficult really to do. And I think there are many open questions with that. So we are on the process to work on this, but I don't think we have found all answers on this, because the trade-off between anonymization and utility of data is a strong one, right? So for example, coming back to the PV generation forecasting, you need a lot of valid and high quality data in certain time intervals. As we discussed, you need weather data, you need temperature, you might need other environmental parameters, wind conditions, what have you. But also you might want to have location information. And of course, the closer you get to the point, the more critical privacy issues become, right? You also want to have, let's say, system properties, peak power output, the efficiency of the devices, the orientation of the panels, and what have you, on the angles that we just mentioned on the previous slides. And of course, this all tells you something, right? If you combine it all, there's the danger of revealing too much. Other issues, other use case that could be done is about, the energy consumption profiling, load monitoring, and so forth. Here, of course, it's easy to get signatures of certain devices which could be traced back and located, and privacy could be revealed. And of course, for that, a lot of analysis needs to be done, and some approaches need to be followed, right? For example, you would like to distinguish between direct personal data that is available, explicitly, and typically this is a kind of rare data in a sense, right? Where you have the name and the date of birth, telephone number, addresses, and so forth. Typically, there's a registration system in place that collects all this information. But then there's a lot of indirect personal data, pseudonyms, IDs of the devices, like the energy management system. Then we have these PV properties that we just discussed. We needed it for forecasting, and there's a lot of energy data about EVs and so forth, and about this all these devices, right? The question is, how can the data be explored? On the other hand, privacy be protected, and of course you need an attacker model for that. And then, of course, the question is how, let's say, how can data be colluded such that privacy can still be protected, right? For example, so that's kind of an approach that's currently underway that we are investigating for that by categorizing the data into different forms and seeing what kind of flow of energy is being possible, right? So, for example, and for this analysis, there's the maximum collision set, for example, that allows you to combine the energy management system backend with the energy management system edge, but not combine it with the registration system, for example, or the open energy data platform for that purpose. And of course, then to do a further analysis, which is a bit out of the scope of this presentation, but if you're interested in that, there's a possibility to talk to Dasha later on. She's online, but this is ongoing research, so we haven't included so much on this, where we try to, let's say, categorize the flow of information and restrict the flow of information further. So based on this analysis, we are publishing the paper on publishing the data on open data platforms, for example, with 5 energy management systems from last year, and where all the data of the year shall be published, such that this is the goal: privacy information is not leaked, and also some further energy management system, 10 energy management systems over the period of October 17 to February 2020. So this data all entails information about PV generation, and then data from data about grid consumption, the load consumption and storage, energy storage, state of charge of the battery. Some metadata is also being revealed, right? And this all based on a time series interval of 15 minutes. So that kind of data is being revealed, so you can see what kind of data is in this database, hopefully without affecting privacy. So the issues, the challenges that I've mentioned before are tried hard in order to to be mapped or mitigated, I should better say, to be mitigated. Okay. So yeah, this is part of the research. This was the MSIC project, which has, as I said, several goals, which is about usage of storage, energy storage most efficiently, based on some optimization goals, multi-objective criteria that have been used, and then of course the publishing of data on open platforms, where some conflicting goals to be considered. So in particular, I mean, there's a paper that is currently been submitted and under review, where details of this approach is being published. Okay, good. So this is so much for the MSIC project, which is our local project, a Bavarian project, together with Phenicon, which is a startup company, and a quite successful company on battery storage energy systems. The other projects I mentioned before is about the resilience of the system and the capability to deal with blackout situations, or to avoid blackout, or to recover from blackouts, right? And of course, blackout incidents happen quite often, right? So there's a kind of a figure here that gives you an indication about serious events that happen in the past. And there are many reasons, of course, for blackouts, which is interesting to look at in detail. Why does a blackout happen? And by the way, we were very close to a blackout in Europe on 8th of January this year. It could be avoided, but only barely. Actually, it was quite critical situation, and so we were very close to a European blackout again. And these blackout incidents, I mean, this is important to analyze them carefully, right? What are the reasons for that? For example, right? One of the most interesting cases is this 2003 blackout event, where actually the problem is about state classification. Again, we're coming back to the data issue, right? To do this insufficiently well actually can lead to a blackout. So this is a very serious, drastic event that happens due to failure of doing correct state estimations. And as a result, there was misled information, corrective actions were not done properly. So that's why resilience is so important, of a resilient system that is not so sensitive to these errors that might happen, right? And then as a result, cascading failures did happen. Now, with the current power systems and the smart grids, we have a strong interdependency between power and ICT. I think that's the starting point, right? So this is quite important, and I think this is something to take into account. We have a cyber-physical system, which is as much as is ICT, as it is power related or power resource related. And this interdependency is really a tough thing. We thought it's much easier to look into this. There are new threats coming up, but to understand them and really to isolate them and do a proper analysis is a difficult thing. As I said, you can see this in this North American event where simply, let's say, state classification, state estimation played a major role. And wherever where these issues come to pass, it's not so easy, not so straightforward. Now we do modeling for that. So let's say we try to investigate the resilience of that such system, where we focus in particular of the what we call interconnector, right? Try to identify the conditions under which there's an interaction and a connection which is an abstract, of course, definition. And once we have understood that, we do a modeling, performance modeling, for example, of that. But again, this depends on valid data, right? So the data needs to be available, and they need to be really good, because only with valid modeling data we can do a good prediction and analysis using, for example, stochastic activity networks, where in order to do an evaluation of the, let's say, the availability as a measure of the resilience, it strongly depends, of course, on the data quality that's been made available. Again, that research has been published by Amit, who is also online. So if you want to ask him further question on this, you're very welcome to ask these questions, right? So, so what is this resilience and the interconnectors all about? For example, we looked at the state estimation problem that actually caused the blackout in North America, and also the controller of the transformer, the load step changer that needs to be controlled. And of course, this needs to be controlled by using ICT automation facilities. And if there's a detrimental effect, then of course this might lead to serious problems, because timeliness is affected badly, which is no good in this context, right? So there's kind of timeliness or real-time constraint properties to be observed and to be maintained. Is there a question? No. Okay, right, but the issue is how to get the data for that, right? So, and this data must be collected and be also processed for proper state estimation and for the on the load step changes, right? So based on this, we did an analysis, let's say, how detrimental effect of the data, again, the data quality affects let's say the system state, because of course you want to observe and you want to respond, but if the information you get is in a detrimental form, a degraded form, there might be serious effects, right? For that we came up with this classification of the system state, the service state, which alternates between the normal mode, limit availability mode, and the failed mode, right? And certain conditions that apply to this, meaning that in the normal mode, of course, the controller, like the old TC controller, receives the sufficiently detailed measurement results. The tap position can be adjusted. And of course, the measurement results are available in time. But of course, if some data is not available or delayed, or measurements inaccurate, then there's a limited system, service availability, or they might be completely failed. So this is to be taken into account, and the resources need to be optimized such that hopefully will stay in a normal or in the limited state. So which is important to understand here, that while the resources might be detrimentally affected, the services should not. At least it should be up and running in the highest possible level, so which is part of the resilience management in order to reorganize the resources such that the service quality will be in the best possible way. So that's the goal of this project, by using this the modeling approach and quantification approach in order to investigate the connectors between the power system and the ICT system, such that the overall service will be on the highest possible level. So these are, let's say, three categories how we distinguish the service levels that are affected. Right. Now the next thing is, so this is about the resiliency, where we want to keep the service state in the best possible level. However, of course, eventually all efforts might fail, and we have to resort to a blackout in the end, right? So if that happens, it might be unavoidable. Then still we need to mitigate the blackout effects, and of course reboot the whole system. So that's the next project in this regard, where we need to be able to a situation that black start is being made possible, right? So we can get some figures of blackout situation of the same incidents that I mentioned before. You can see that what it really means to live in a blackout, and what to do in order to recover from that. Now, under blackout conditions, of course, the coordination between power and ICT is even more difficult, right? So you need to have a very close control of the power supply, because if power is out, ICT doesn't work. If ICT is out, power system is very difficult to reboot it. So one has to be very careful with an incremental process in order to start up the whole, or to recover the system carefully, and being conscious about the scarcity of the resources, maybe meaning that step by step the loads are being restored, and the ICT system is being restored. So this again is a kind of multi-objective optimization problem that needs to be fulfilled, which is actually easier said than done, because one of the problems is really that there's not enough data for that, actually. And getting hold of the data is a huge challenge, a big problem, in order to do a proper analysis, and then, of course, having a strategy how to recover. There are very reasons for that, because the data themselves are, let's say, not, they're not made accessible, easily, because they're typically seen as to be, really critical data, safety critical data. They're protected, they are taken as confidential. However, you need this data in order to be able to come up with a proper strategy, because if you don't know anything about the resources, how can you assemble them and put them together and recover from such a drastic event? And this is kind of a catch-22 situation, right? So we need to have valid data again. So the quality of data matters a lot, and so we did quite a bit of an effort in order to collect data about the power system and about the communication equipment and communication infrastructure that's out there, in particular the wireless communication system that's rolled out, and it's quite hard really to get the information and to relate it to each other, actually, right? So and now, of course, what we were able to do, that we tried to find out about spatial proximity between the systems, which is the communication system, the wireless mobile communication system, and the power system, and somehow try to correlate the location-specific information, the equipment with regards to supply to each other. And so that was part of the of the goal that we wanted to find out, right? Where is everything located? What's the relative positioning to each other? What's the area of coverage? So you have certain coverage of area of, let's say, some power supply stations in relation to the ICT components. Are they in the same area covered, or are they in different areas? Are they independent for that reason, and so forth? So this information actually, unfortunately, is not really readily available. What we did, we looked at open geodata, for example, but of course, there's a problem there with the quality of the data and the resolution of the data. So there needs to be some pre-processing, with all of that, which is an untrivial thing to do. Then, of course, this data is defective. It's not ideal. And of course, you might need to combine several data sources in order to get the quality of the data that you want to have. And then, of course, there's the correlation between the spatial locations, and of course, some mining in that respect needs to be done. So there's multiple data corrections method also to be applied there. So yeah, this is quite a data analysis process that has been performed. And again, if you're interested in that topic, I would recommend you talk to Anna. She's also on this call. So she did this. This is pretty brand new work that she has accomplished. And this paper has just been submitted recently and provide this analysis. So for example, some partial insights is about, you know, this power supply area and the range of this, for example, because you need these numbers, all right? This is you want to do some recovery from blackouts, how to assemble the resources. Vague information is not enough. You need precise information. You need location information. You need the coverage, the area being covered, and so forth. So this was the result that Anna found out. And actually, it also depends on where this location is. Is it an urban area? Is it a semi-urban area? Is it in rural area? It all looks different, right? So it's quite a tedious process, right? And so you can see this the results of these figures. Let's say the distance between the ICT and the power systems, depending on where you are, and you can see this differences in figures, which is important to know in the case of the case, right? If things happening. Also, let's say the range of coverage of the ICT is important. The different technology that's available at the moment is important. So you can see it again. This is different in different areas, whether in rural areas or in urban areas, and it all matters in the end. If you want to step by step create islands of power and ICT, that's again up and running. With all this information, then one would be able, in order to recover the system step by step, where, you know, depending on the availability, let's say, of supply, then you would step by step, then let's say in the first step, reorganize about 10% of the load. In the second step, another getting up close to, let's say, 40%, and then reaching 40%, and so forth. So it all depends about what kind of resource availability is being in terms of energy supply, for example. This is sort of labeled by the battery, and then you can increase, and hopefully, if enough resource available, you can reach 100% coverage again. So yeah, this is quite pioneering work, I think, but it's ongoing work, and so this project has been running for about 3 years, but there's more, I think, 1.5 years to come. So it's about 2/3 on the way where we are at the moment with this type of research. Yeah, another project I mentioned before. Steve, if I'm running out of time, just let me know, right? Or if you're tired to listen, then also let me know. Or anybody else.
12 minutes. So
say it again.
You know, we've got about 12 minutes. So
12
what
minutes.
You can maybe do in that time, and maybe some time for some questions. So
right, yeah, absolutely. Okay. Okay, some different representative work that we did is about EV charging. As I said, again, we had different approaches about model-driven approaches, data-driven approaches, similar than with the batteries that we saw before. Where again, you can see about model-based approaches, of course, have some advantages that you're much more flexible, although accuracy is limited, as you can see in this plot here. If you compare it to data-driven and machine learning approaches, you're much better, but you're of course reliant on real data. And of course, accuracy is much better. And as a result, of course, as has been obvious, one tries to combine both things, have a hybrid approach, and this seems to be working quite well, right? In order to again charge the EVs according to the best possible way, in order to take into account the power supply, in particular the renewable energy supply, but also taking into account that there are issues of overloading the grid, for example, overloading resource in the grid like the transformers, or have some weak points in the grid that also should be taken into account for an adaptive charging. So this is let's say was one of the goals of this electricity project. Dominic and Philip, they're also on this call, so they were on this project which has finished by now. So I think we're done with that. There's a lot of instrumentation, and we instrumented a real grid part, and so we tried to validate our approach as much as we could. Just as an outline here, you could see that the difficulty somehow, this is the map of Bavaria, right? And so we did an analysis in terms of the renewable energies that are available, where they are available with regard to space, and when are they available. And so map this then onto the grid such that you could charge your EV where the likelihood to meet the biggest supply of renewable energies is the highest, right? There's quite a bit of challenges because you want to maximize the mix of green energy in order to charge your EVs. Okay, good. I think I'm skipping this now because it's again related to the privacy issue we had before. It's just, again, you can see this paper here being mentioned, and Dasha being on the call. So let's move on a little bit to the newer projects that they're up and running right now, which is the EasyRes project. The EasyRes project is about providing ancillary services, as said in the introduction of my talk, in a decentralized form, because as we see in the situation that we have, let's say, the continuous switch off of the synchronous generators, the fossil fueled or nuclear power fueled synchronous generators are being increasingly switched off, and we need to resort to distributed energy resources, to renewable energy resources, in order to provide system service. We need to have the system point of view, which is very, very important, I think, and it has been largely neglected, I think, to a large degree. There was an announcement of the NCE last year that the inertia of the system has been reduced by 50% across Europe, which is drastic, right? If you don't have inertia, this is a bit like the gravity of the power system, right? If there's no inertia, there's no gravity, and the gravity holds everything together. And if there's no gravity, it's hard, to sustain. And so it seems to have been ignored somehow that we need to have, and this particular ban in Ireland, for example, the situation due to the windmills there. So we need really to come up quickly with a solution to that. For that reason, of course, you can see this in this figure. In EasyRes, many system services are being investigated. So the power engineers in the project, they provide, let's say, the bare bone techniques in order to tweak the power electronics. It's power electronics interface converters that are smart, right? Intelligent converters it's a multiprocessor system in the end. where all the system services that I mentioned here, one of them being the inertia, for example, others also. One other is also having protection in the system, which is something people might not think of, but it's an ancillary service which is quite important, which needs to be provided, right? Because without protection, things become very dangerous. And the interesting thing is that the power system reaches into our lives. Whether we want it or not, it's happening at this moment. And this has a lot of implications, right? We have PV installation on our rooftops. So we have to live with electricity, with power as part of our life. It's not only, behind the plug, but it has become in our environment, and we need to think more about this. For example, the protection side of things, there is now current where it does not used to be, or the current flow is where it does not used to be, which has a serious impact on protection, for example, right? If there's a shortcut somewhere, what's happening, of course, there's an inrush of current, and this inrush of current leads to the isolation by tripping protection devices. But now, if we have, let's say, the distributed and renewable energy sources, where does this current come from? The synchronous generators are not available anymore for that purpose, as they used to be. So this has to come also from the renewable energy sources, right? And if it comes from renewable energy sources, the current needs to go certain ways, which current is usually not going. And of course, this could lead to sympathetic tripping, which is not what you want, because then the grid will be isolated elsewhere where the problem not really is located, and so forth. So they're very interesting and big challenges to think about. So what we're working up in this context to provide the ICT system for that, meaning we need to think of abstractions, right? The abstractions that are relevant here. We talk about energy class in this context that can then be used in aggregated form for the ancillary services, as if there was a synchronous generator still available, which is not, of course. And what leads to the energy classes is aggregation, disaggregation procedures, also for accounting and so forth, for fault tolerance purposes. And of course, also visualization needs to be done of the data. So there's a dashboard to be developed in order to visualize, let's say, for the whole system. And the whole system will be a big one, because there might be thousands of components that need to be, and the system that needs to be scalable. We know from computer science how to build distributed system. I mean, the DNS, domain name system, is a distributed system that has a global reach, right? And it's scalable and it's working, but it's non-trivial. It's quite challenging. And now we do a similar thing. We want to do this, right, for the cyber-physical system, the power system, which is partially power, partially ICT related. And everything, of course, has to be protected and to be operable in a secure manner. So we need a directory service. We need to make sense of the data. We need to locate the data and these kind of things. And we give meaning to the power data, and for that we use the Web of Things as a technique. In order then to provide the basis within a directory service, saying what really could be done, right? What is the properties of the resources, and what is possible to do with the resources? What kind of ancillary service can be provided based on the type of resources, and so forth, right? And of course, yeah.
Sorry, there's about 3 minutes to the hour, so.
Okay, I'm almost done, right? So. And of course, there needs to be the ICT infrastructure in place for that, and the right protocol. One nice thing is about the Web of Things that it's really, really compliant with what's called the smart grid architectural model. It can be nicely mapped to each other, which consists of business layer, function layer, information layer, and communication layer. And you can see that there's quite a nice correspondence with that. So some of you might be familiar with the smart grid architectural model. Okay, I think last remark now, the current project that has been started is the called Energetic project, which looks into community services, which looks into citizen energy communities and renewable energy communities, where the people shall be taken along, right? So the people and the communities are the dominating factor. And we look at different locations across Europe and different settings, a university campus, downtown development in Belgium, a harbor development area, and a hospital in Italy, where we're looking at the different relations between the legislation, regulation, economic business, and the IT side of things. And our part, of course, again, is the IT side of things in order to manage these communities. Right, so that's it, I would say. Thanks for your attention. I talked about, let's say, various projects, always about the same thing, essentially. It's about the interrelationship between power systems and ICT systems, which are different beasts, but they come together and they need to marry, of course, and they need to stay married. And all of that is connected by the quality of the data that connects them all in the end, right? So with the various projects that are shown in the slide I've been talking about. And of course, there's, in the end, the quality of the power supply that's needed, but there's all the quality of the ICT services. So we have this triangular situation of lots of qualities: quality of power, quality of ICT, quality of data. And of course, they're intrinsically related and affect each other, and which is seen from different perspectives in those projects I've just mentioned in the short course I just gave to you. Thank you very much for your attention. Almost on time.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we can just give you a virtual applause on there. I think we've time for questions. You're happy to stick around and answer, I assume, a few questions from the audience. And also, I noticed you've got some of your colleagues in the audience as well, so feel free to ask them to answer anything. So I think I'll ask maybe a quick one, and please, if people want to either just type their questions in the chat or they can put their hand up, and I'll ask them to ask a live question. One question I will ask is about what we're interested in as well is you've got some really great applications there, and you're working with a few organizations as well, of course. What is your experience with implementing these things within organizations and getting them actually sort of done live? And what are some of the challenges, if any, have you found?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's many challenges. I mean, as I said, there's the safety concerns, and data is not readily provided, and of course there's also the issue about business secrets, but there's also the anxiety about safety and these issues, and it's really a non-trivial thing. So that's why we made this great effort in the Black Star project, really to collect out the data ourselves and avoid having these discussions. And of course, if you get the data, then I think the likelihood that you're able to publish the data is going to zero in the end, right? On open databases, this is kind of, or open data platforms, this is kind of, you can ignore this. It's not possible in the end, I would say, and which is a problem, of course, for research, because we kind of inclined to publish the data in order to make things replicable, and which is hard to do under these circumstances, which is not the worst, but I think the worst is really that this is a critical infrastructure and we need to understand what's going on. And sometimes what is worse, actually, if you don't get hold of the data in order to do the proper analysis, I think that's actually much worse than the open data platforms, I think. It's an add-on, which is good, really, but not getting hold of the data is really tough, I think, because then, yeah, to obscurity for security is one of the principles that are quite common in this context. On the other hand, what is surprising, I think that many systems are not well protected, actually. So it's relatively easy to get access to power systems, to critical parts of the power systems. If you go to the utilities, sometimes it's really, really badly protected. Even the passwords are not set and things like that, which is kind of a stark contrast that on the one hand, everything is quite restricted and you don't get hold of the data, even if you try hard and if you promise everything. On the other hand, you can collect it on a not so legal way yourself, right? Which is strange, actually, yeah.
It's interesting. Tibin, Joseph's got a question. Just get a hand up if you want to mic yourself.
Yes, thanks, Stephen, and thanks, Prof. Hermann, for the interesting and it's a very timely presentation. I'm Tibin. I'm a power systems engineer within the Catapult. So obviously there are multiple dimensions, but I will start with your strength, which is ICT systems. You're working in the power system. So wondering, what is you proposing in the future? Is it a standalone ICT structure which is different from what at the moment the distribution companies or transmission companies are using? and or what kind of challenges you see in the standalone system, or going forward, you are trying to use the existing ICT architecture to gather your information to perform flexibility or ancillary services. If so, would it be possible to gather the information to perform the analysis using big data, and how challenging is that, you think?
There's a lot of questions. I mean, I think there's a trend that, of course, kind of at least not to use public communication infrastructure, right? So, I mean, there's public protocols being used. Of course, everything will be IP related, but I think there's a trend to use reserved frequency and have, let's say, a private network up and running. If that answers your question. So that's my observation. That there's a trend in this direction to have a reserved frequency area, and then using, for example, 5G technology, I think, and IP. I would say that's the trend at the moment I'm observing in the end. What was the other questions, please? Can you repeat?
Sorry. Yes. Thanks for the first part. The second part was, if you're using the existing architecture or ICT architecture of the utilities, how are you going to access the data? Is it feasible? Get all this data, and how do you kind of process them for the data kind of approaches you're using, like machine learning or approaches you're using?
I mean, there are challenges, but I think so far we have managed to overcome these challenges. Either, I think the partners in the project were quite collaborative and provided us with all the data. I think this worked out nicely. Sometimes the data is not available, then we try to help us ourselves. I think the more challenges is if you want to publish things on open platforms, as I discussed before, and this is where the problem really starts. How to do this because research results can always be published, in a way. I believe that you can provide anonymization and try not to reveal sensitive information. I think that's possible, and I'm convinced that's not a real issue. But to publish all data on open platform, I think that's where the problem comes into the picture. So far, we haven't really had problems, seriously problems with project partners. Of course, if they're not part of the project, it's different, right? So that's harder to get hold of data, and there's quite a restriction. That's what we discussed before, actually. So. But within projects, it wasn't a problem. But the bigger problem I'm seeing with the need and the request by society and by funding agencies that we put the data on open platforms, that's a real challenge. I don't have a perfect answer to that. Probably there's more to do, and I'm not even sure it's worth it in the end, because the effort is enormous, right? Because these data platforms need to be maintained and kept up and running and updated, and I'm not sure it's really worth it, but it's a very interesting research question to do this properly.
Okay, thank you.
I have another question about you talked about a little bit about anonymization. So what's your experience with with using these? How much, when you apply a modifier or you have data which is modified to make it more anonymous or pseudo-anonymization, how much value do you feel in practice you've had with when that is applied? How much loss of value do you get from the data?
Man, that's hard to quantify, really. It's a tough one. Anonymization is not easy, really, to do this such that the value of the data is maintained. It's I don't know. I mean, I don't have a satisfying answer to that. But I doubt in the end that this is generally possible, right? That's why I'm saying it's so difficult to fill these open data platforms in a satisfying manner. So we're in the process of doing that, and we're doing, because it's interesting, and we're also required to do that. But I'm a bit skeptical, really, right, about the value. So if this qualitative answer is satisfying to you, I cannot really quantify it, I must say.
I mean, yeah, I think my feeling is it's very difficult to understand. And I'm not sure. Do you believe that maybe organizations are have not really invested in so much ways to modify their data to make it open anyway.
Well, actually, in a way, maybe the whole thing is overdone, right? So I think, like we did our research in the Black Start thing, if you really put the effort into it, you can get quite good results in the end, right? That you can collect. Many of the data are public. So I think perhaps one should really open up the data from the beginning and not being so worried about that, and rather than having, let's say, not having security by obscurity, but then taking particular measures, right, in order to protect the system and the data on purpose. Yeah, that probably would give me a better feeling to from the beginning to open up the data, right? But it's a difficult question, right? It's really hard, because I mean, if an incident happens, of course, you know, people are afraid to be made liable for the issues, right? So it's tough. But of course, you know, yeah, of course, with opening up, we have been successful in the IT context, but here it's a bit different.
And I guess like my last one then is which data sets have you found you would like the most, which you're maybe struggling to get, or which are very sparse out there within the platforms or so on?
There, I would like to resort maybe to Anna or Philip or Dominic, if you want to answer something of this question. If you're still online, I hope.
Yes, we are sure there. So for us, from the perspective of Black Start project, for us the most critical was to find good quality ICT data. So we've been interested in cellular network in particular, because cellular network is the network which will be probably installed for the distribution grid level on the different regions. Yeah, the problem was that, yeah, we've been lucky to find official base station location data, but there was only location. There was only geo data with no particular features regarding the type of the technology, range, and so on. So we had to work to find more resources which would contain these features. Then we would have to bring both data sets, like 3 data sets, together in a proper way, which would represent then all the features we require. For the power system data was also an issue, because we've been using OpenStreetMap data, which of course not that reliable, but yeah, we actually didn't have another choice here. So there was also a lot of work, a lot of methodologies required to extract only reliable nodes which we can trust. We approach it the following way. So we've been trying to figure out in which regions, in which particular scenarios, so in which particular cities, towns, the quality of data is the highest. So we've been working only with this particular region. So this kind of selectivity was the primary method on how to guarantee reliable data and good results there. That's from my side. I think, Philip, you can add something on PBs.
I think he might have gone.
No, sorry. For predicting the parameters of the physical PV model, we of course used past historical data of the power plant, of the PV plant. However, we used the ERA5 climate reanalysis data, which is satellite based. There's kind of an issue because it only provides a resolution of 0.25 degree on latitude and longitude on Landsat. Which means that, of course, the method is limited to the resolution of this data. On the timing scale, it has a resolution of 1 hour, which is fitting quite well with the past data of the PV generation. However, of course, this method is kind of restricted to the resolution of the data. In specific, when you talk about the location, it's of course resolution of latitude, longitude.
Yeah, thanks. That's very interesting. I think, yeah, with the linking the climate data our local area as well is quite interesting. Yeah, okay. Well, I think if there's any more questions, that was brilliant. Thank you, Anna, Philip, and Herman that was brilliant talk. So I'll give one more virtual round applause. So yeah, so we'll talk about what maybe we can share later after this, and maybe if we will have the video ready at the end of this. So thanks very much again for coming, giving a really interesting talk. I also have some of your project lists which I'll share as well with everyone else. Are you happy to discuss anything further? If anyone's got any questions for you after this?
Of course. So you're always welcome to ask questions, or if you're interested in the projects, come approach us, or me or the guys and girls, and of course we're happy to answer all questions and start collaborations if you're interested.
Yeah, it sounds like there's some really interesting stuff that overlaps with a lot of the stuff we're doing here. So I think there's some things we could do. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, this was the main purpose, to share some state of research and see whether there are points of connection, and we could do something together, I think. Yeah. So we have several projects, as I said, European level projects, or the DFG project, which is like ABSRACT projects, very similar from structural point of view, and so all sorts of possibilities are given.
Brilliant. Right. Well, thank you very much again, and I'll be in touch to wrap up what material we can share. And yeah, please get in contact with Professor Hermann De Meer if you have any other questions, and I'll forward them on and get you in contact.
Okay, thanks for giving us the opportunity. All right.
Cheers.
Take care. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.